Hi there, Brian once again. In my ongoing promise to finish my Blood Angels army, I want to use my next few videos to show how I use oil washing on some of my miniatures. In this video I wanted to demonstrate it on the first squad of my new Primaris Vanguard Veterans, and then in later videos I'll show you how to use it on vehicles and scenery. Now it may take some time to get these made because I still have to work full time and it's really busy at work at the moment, but hopefully I should get them uploaded soon. I won't be covering how I painted every part of these miniatures, as I've covered the most of this in my main Blood Angels series, which I've linked in the cards above, so please feel free to check those out. But I did use a different technique for the lightning claws, which I'll cover in detail towards the end of the video. As always, if you find anything in the video useful, please consider liking or subscribing to the channel for more content in the future. Now let's get started. I have here some minis from both squads of my Vanguard Vets, which I'll be using to demonstrate. Both squads have been given coats of Vallejo polyurethane gloss varnish and given time to cure, about 2 to 3 hours. Letting the varnish cure is very important. The longer it cures, the harder the varnish gets, and the more it will protect your paint layer underneath. You'll see why this is important later on. Some models here are just base coated red because it shows the pin washing much better on camera. But later, I'll show you why I like to give all the details their base coat before I apply the oil wash. So let's have a look at the paints I use. The best type of oil paints, and the most affordable, are those by Winsor & Newton. They have many brands, but the most common are Artist Soil Colour and Winton. Artist Soil Colour is their professional grade, and costs around £7.50 per tube, but it has a very high and smooth pigment count. Winton is their student or beginners brand. They cost around £2.50 a tube, and it's considered one of the best introductory oil paint brands. Now I've tried both, and I recommend that you start with Winton, because it's cheap and it's good quality. I've used it on all my miniatures up to now. The only reason I'm using Artist Soil Black in this video is because my Winton Black ran out and I haven't been able to find a replacement. So I bought the Artist Soil, and honestly I can see very little difference, so you're better off saving yourself the money. Now when you're buying these, on the back of each tube it's important to note the colour's opacity. This is marked by a small square on the back of the label. A black square means that the paint is opaque, half black means semi-opaque, and an empty square means it's non-opaque or transparent. You can see here that the burnt sienna is transparent, so that means I might have to mix it with another paint depending on the effect I want to achieve. To dilute the paints, I use Winsor & Newton's Sansador thinner. You do not need a big tub like this. The only reason I have this is because I like to paint on canvas in my spare time, so I use quite a lot of it. However, a small bottle costs anywhere from around £5 upwards, and it should last you for ages. Now, please be careful with this stuff. It is odourless, but that doesn't mean it's not toxic. It's really bad for your skin, so always wear gloves, and because it contains hydrocarbons, it's really bad for your lungs over time. If you're going to use this, make sure your painting area is really well ventilated, or even better, make sure you're wearing a respirator. I use a 3M ventilator which is suitable for paints and solvents. I'll link it in the description below. For mixing, I use these little metallic dishes, which you can get along with pipettes or droppers on Amazon. There are lots of different quantities, packs and options ranging from £5 upwards. And finally, I've got some old end-of-life brushes for mixing it all together, and some cheap synthetic detail brushes for applying it. Anything size 0 or 00 is fine. So I'm going to start with a black wash for the armour. I put a pea-sized amount of paint into the dish, and then add some Sansador thinner. Usually just enough to give the bottom of the tray a thin layer. Then I take my brush and I start to draw in the paint and mix. Now there's no hard and fast rule to this. You don't have to use all of the paint, just mix in what you need slowly and carefully, and don't overdo it, or it's going to become too thick, and then you'll have to add more thinner. Generally, you're looking for a consistency a little like milk, but that can change depending on the model you're applying it to. But for Space Marines, this milk-like consistency works for me. When you test the mix on the side of the dish, you want it to cling slightly, just like a normal acrylic wash. Then using a synthetic fine detail brush, I like to start applying at the bottom of the legs. Because of how I base my miniatures, this area generally gets covered up, so it's an ideal place for me to start and to test. The gloss coat lowers the surface tension of the mini, and combined with the Sansador thinner, allows the paint to flow off your brush by capillary action and flood the area. If it's too thick, it's not going to flow as easily. But then if it's too thin, there won't be enough pigment left in the area once the Sansador evaporates, meaning you may have to give it a second coat. Sometimes I do have to give this a second coat, because as I said, there's no hard and fast rule, and every miniature has different levels of detail. Again, it just comes with practice and experience. As you can see, it really helps details like the chest aquila stand out, and it gives them a nice solid outline. And don't worry if it looks like it's pulled into those crevices or it's settling in a puddle. Remember, Sansador will evaporate and should leave behind only the pigment. There are two little tricks you can use to get the wash to flow into areas like the shoulder pads or knee pads. The first is to simply follow the wash along the recess and touch very gently, and eventually it should start to flood the area on its own. Another is just to keep touching the tip of the brush to the area, and if capillary action is working, it should just draw off your brush and flow along without any help. And here's a completed miniature. Now it's a mess, I admit. I usually do it a lot neater, but I did this on purpose. Because one of the great things about oil washing, unlike acrylics, is that it can be fixed even when it's dry. I recommend leaving a miniature like this overnight to make sure it's completely dry, though depending on weather and humidity levels, you may need a bit longer. So let's tidy this guy up a bit. By taking a clean eyeshadow brush, or a small paint brush dipped in clean Sansador, you can reactivate the oil paint and simply brush it off. This is why allowing the varnish to cure is essential. Without this, you can very easily rub that acrylic paint off. By using a small, clean brush dipped in Sansador, you can even tidy up any seams that are too thick or messy. Or you can even blend the wash for a slightly smoother effect. There's always going to be problem seams on a miniature, like here for example, where the jetpacks have been glued together. On areas like this, I just apply the wash as best I can and then tidy it up with a small brush like so. So as I mentioned earlier, I've started to oil wash miniatures after all their details have been given their base coats. I used to oil wash when all the details were simply blacked out, but for units like Vanguard Veterans who have a lot of detail, doing it at this stage really helps to make that detail stand out by giving it an outline. It also helps to cover up those hard to reach areas where two colours may meet. Alongside the black wash, I'm going to make up a mix of burnt umber and burnt sienna. This is for the gold, bone and parchment details. Now this is optional. I don't usually do this for standard Space Marines, but I wanted these guys to really stand out. So I start as before with a pea-sized amount of each paint in the same dish, and I mix in about 60% sienna and 40% umber. I'm aiming for a nice warm, rich, reddish brown. Burnt sienna is a transparent paint, and it's a little too light coloured on its own for shading, so mixing in the umber will help to make it semi-opaque and darken it just a little. On gold it gives a really nice warm, subtle shade that picks out details much better than any acrylic wash. On bone and parchment it flows into those recesses and shows details in such a way that they almost need no highlighting sometimes. It's not something I do for every model, but it does help save time with these Vanguard Veterans. Oh, and it really doesn't matter if the washes mix on the model in my opinion, but if you want to be sure, just let the first wash dry for at least 2 or 3 hours. This will mean that most of the Sansador has evaporated and it's less likely to run. Once complete and dried, I take the time to give the model a good inspection and make sure I haven't missed anything. And then I take some time to clean up any mistakes or areas where the wash has dried a little bit too thick. Once it's completely dry, I apply a thin coat of Vallejo polyurethane gloss varnish to seal, and then I start to apply the transfers, which for these guys, thankfully, they just have on their knees. I then seal that again with gloss varnish before applying a layer of polyurethane matte varnish. You can really see the difference the wash makes to a miniature, helping to add depth and contrast. It also helps to show you areas that may need their base layer touched up, and with a nice black outline around it, I find that much easier if necessary. So that's it for oil washing. At this stage, I simply carried on highlighting my models using the same techniques in my previous series, but I did say that I would show you how I painted the lightning claws, because I kind of made it up on the fly. Me and glazing are still having some patience issues, and I really need more practice, but I just don't have the time at the moment. Basically, I'm being lazy, but I just wanted these guys done, and I have a game coming up soon. I gave the claws a base coat of Citadel's Lawthorn Blue, and then applied a wash of Citadel Drakenhof Nightshade. I simply held the mini in such a way that the claws were upside down, and then made sure that the shade settled into the centre of each blade and at the bottom. In between the blades, I just gave them a normal wash. You don't need to worry so much because you can't really see those clearly. You might need to prop the miniature upside down until this dries, because otherwise it's going to run and ruin the effect. So go and put the kettle on and come back in about 15 or 20 minutes. Once dry, I give each blade an edge highlight of Lawthorn Blue. And finally, I add some highlights to the tips with Vallejo Game Dead White. I only highlight at least half of each blade, making sure not to cover up your blue highlights too much. And with a few coats of AK Interactive Ultramatte Varnish, I'm done. And there we have it, my first squad of Custom Vanguard Veterans, just in time for a game later this week. So I hope this video has helped you and given you some examples or ideas for oil washing, and that it's not been too vague. Remember, there's no hard and fast rules, so it's open to experimentation. Some miniatures work better with a thicker wash, others better with a thinner wash, but with a good coat of gloss varnish before you start, you can easily remove that and try again, so definitely give this a go. So if you have found this useful, please feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you next time where I'm going to show you how to use oil washing on vehicles and scenery and get some really nice effects. So until then, remember, have fun, enjoy your painting, and I'll see you soon.